It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. Iran's President Ebrahim Raeisi says a new world order is being shaped in favor of independent, freedom-seeking nations. Raeisi made the remarks while meeting with his Venezuelan counterpart Nicolas Maduro during the first leg of a three-nation Latin American tour. In the meeting, Maduro also underlined that imperialism is falling apart, adding that the countries standing up to arrogant powers are now on the brink of victory. Regarding Tehran-Caracas relations, the two presidents agreed to increase the volume of bilateral trade.
The level of economic cooperation was at a level of $600 million 2 years ago, but today this has increased to more than $3 billion. The goal we have for commercial and economic cooperation, the first step is to take the level of cooperation to $10 billion, and the next step we want to take it to $20 billion.
We are signing an agreement that allows us to raise trade to the levels that President Raeisi is pointing out, to take it from $3.3 billion on this stage to $10 billion and then to $20 billion.
Raeisi and Maduro signed 25 cooperation documents. Those were in areas of information and communications technology, energy, petrochemicals, maritime transportation, agriculture, medicine, mining, and culture. Raeisi described the two countries' relations as strategic, calling for the agreements to come into effect as soon as possible. The Iranian president will visit two other Latin American countries, namely Nicaragua and Cuba. Before departing Tehran on Monday, Raeisi said that Iran and the three Latin American nations share the same stance against hegemony and unilateralism. Hamid Shahrabi, Research Director at the House of Latin America, joins us here in the capital, Tehran. And also John Stepling, who's an author and commentator, joins us from Inderøy in Norway. Gentlemen, welcome. Hamid Shahrabi, I'll start with you first. The trip made by Iran's President Ebrahim Raeisi to these three Latin American nations is significant, in your opinion, as to why. Why do you think it is significant? Is it because all these countries are under sanctions and that they are now working to expand their relations under this, what's called the New World Order, as the Iranian president has said?
Yes, with greetings to your respected audience, I would make short comments on your question. We can look at this from different angles. One is the historical angle. We are talking about the relationship between the countries that historically have been oppressed by a system, namely called imperialism, that has denied and neglected the national interest of these countries. Now the situation worldwide has changed. We are witnessing the countries that have been able to succeed in their struggles for self-determination, and now this trip is taking place in a new world context. The emergence and development of new alliances, worldwide alliances, that provides the possibility for independent nations to join their efforts in order to preserve their national interest. This wasn't the case historically. Historically, the national interest of Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, and all these countries was subordinated to the interests of the corporations, mainly Western corporations. And now, as we are witnessing, you just quoted that the volume of the exchange between Iran and Venezuela is going to expand 10 times, from 3 billion to 30 billion. And this is just the start of the case. This is the prospect is much more promising.
Sure.
And I would like to emphasize one specific aspect, which is the next trip of President Raeisi to a country that has been resisting all these imperialist pressures for more than 60 years. I'm talking about Cuba, which is at the time that we are speaking is in urgent need of support and solidarity. And this trip of President Raeisi provides the possibilities that we expand cooperations with Cuba, mainly in regard to helping them for the energy, for the oil, and in the area of the health.
Right. Well, I'm glad you mentioned energy and oil. John Stepling, it's very interesting. I don't know if you find it interesting, but I found it interesting when they, Western media has depicted this trip by Iranian President Raisi somewhat in a negative light, where it says all these countries that are sanctioned is where the Iranian president is visiting. But in the bigger picture, when you take a look at the amount of oil and gas not only Iran but Venezuela has, which is in the top 5 in the world, and you also put Russia in that mix, and then you put China in that mix also, kind of by default. We're looking at almost 40% of the world's energy market. So they don't want to highlight that, do they? How big a deal is this when you take a look at the alignment that's taking place, and of course the defeat of U.S. sanctions, especially when it comes to how they have weaponized the dollar, for example, and other ways?
Well, I think this is part of a rather significant global realignment. BRICS being the primary symbol of this. Something Washington has feared for a long time has been de-dollarization, the loss of the dollar as the reserve currency. And that looms on the horizon. It's going to take a little bit of time, but this is an assault on the Bretton Woods system, and 58 countries have signed on, wanting to join. Some have joined, and it makes up, if you take the population of all the countries that have joined BRICS, it's like 3/4 of the world's population. You have to factor in to all of this that media, global media even, is controlled by the West. Most media is Western media. It is controlled by the United States, Canada, and the EU, and that's the perspective you get if you have to watch media, news programs. You get experts from the EU and the United States. You rarely, if ever, are talking to so-called experts from Iran or China or Indonesia or Brazil or any of India, any of the countries that make up this new sort of group of BRICS-related countries that are decidedly anti-American. These countries are tired of a system that has bullied them, sanctioned them, coerced them, and exploited them for 80-some years. So, that the fact that the Iranian president is visiting Cuba and Nicaragua is significant, because these have been targets of U.S. aggression in the past, of CIA coups and covert actions. And the U.S. has a long history of that. They have undermined and interfered in any independent country, especially socialist or leftist countries. They've engaged in assassination and coups. Everybody knows this. We've talked about it on here repeatedly. And so now we are seeing, for the first time since World War II, a united effort to resist that and form relationships that exclude the United States. And the truth is, the United States is a dying empire. The great imperialist state is floundering. It has domestic crises. Its economy is a disaster, and its foreign policy. Afghanistan, they left after 20 years of occupation, just fled. They are in Syria. They occupy 1/3 of that country. They don't know what to do there. They are being defeated, in a sense, everywhere they go. The defense industry makes money, certainly, but beyond that, it has been miscalculation after miscalculation, Ukraine being the latest. The foreign policy is controlled by these Straussian neocons in the Biden administration. They've been there. They've been in every administration really for 40 years. But and these people are delusional. And it's we're seeing. Look at the trade numbers between Iran and Venezuela now. The increase is dramatic, is profound. It's something like tenfold, as your other guest said. This is significant. The BRICS agreements are significant. Looming on the horizon is a kind of BRICS bank, a BRICS currency. These things are what Washington has fought against for decades and decades, but apparently unsuccessfully, because
Sure.
it is happening.
All right. Last question that I can ask you here, Mr. Sharabi, is when you see the fact that the U.S. has been defeated, in particular when it comes to, aside from their foreign policy blunders, as our guest there mentioned, failed coups by the CIA, et cetera, they're really failing in the trade arena in terms of the world economy, in a sense being left behind. Of course, we're seeing this emerge in terms of the BRICS, in terms of, well, in case of the Iran, its alignment with other countries. What kind of reaction may we see from the U.S. when it comes to its watching, like a spectator, what's happening around it? I mean, this is, you know, in its backyard practically. You're talking about Venezuela, you're talking about Cuba, you're talking about many countries actually that are aligning themselves, and Iran is part of that mix, but the U.S. isn't.
Well, the fact is, as these relationships are quite beneficial and promising for the countries involved, like Iran, Cuba, and all that, it is also the same way. It is very threatening when you look at it from the standpoint of the United States. This is quite alarming for them, because what they wish is to dictate their policies, to keep us separated from each other, to keep Iran and Cuba, Venezuela, all these independent countries separated with each other. I will tell you a fact. When the Iranian students occupied in the earlier years of the revolution the United States Embassy, a document was found that even at that time, which was a direction given from Washington to the embassy in their embassy in Iran, that watch out the relationship between Iran and Cuba. Of course, they watch it, they try to sabotage it, they try to threaten it, they try to use all their means in order to prevent the development of this kind of relationships. But as the other guest in the program correctly mentioned, the situation with the United States has drastically changed.
Right.
You remember a few years ago, they were claiming that they're the only power in the world, that nobody could resist their dictates. But now you're witnessing the BRICS, you're witnessing Shanghai, you're witnessing CELAC, ALBA in the region of the Latin America. We are watching the new alliances between Iran and its neighboring countries. And all these are quite promising changes that, despite the direction and the will and of the United States to sabotage and to prevent development of this type of relationships, sure, they're not in a position to do much about this. The most important factor that is blocking them is the will of the independent nations, is the will of Iran, is the will of Cuba, is the will of Venezuela, to do everything that we can in order to strengthen our relationships.
Okay.
And as I would like again to emphasize that even though it is quite promising that the level of exchange between Iran and these countries is improving, we are yet far behind the great possibilities that exist in regard to strengthen our
sure
relationships.
Thank you very much for that, Hamid Shahrabi, Research Director, House of Latin America. John Stepling, thank you, author and commentator from Inderøy, Norway. And that does for this edition of the News Review program. Thanks for tuning in.